Alrighty, so hello everyone. Welcome to December's book club. I believe this is the 7th month. How about we go around and do intros, so name, institution, position, and something you're excited for during your winter break. So I'm Virginia. I am from Miami University. I'm a graduate student, a second-year graduate student. I have a practicum in the Office of Community Engagement and Service. And something I'm excited for is eating good food in California. So I'm originally from California. I got here on Thursday and just been eating some good food and hanging out with friends and family and all that. Popcorn, Derek.
Okay. Again, my name is Derek Murakami. I'm a residence director at Northwestern University. Yeah, we just closed our buildings this weekend, so we're in winter break. Yay! Yeah, so I guess something I'm looking forward to. Again, yeah, I'm from California, so I'll be heading home for the holidays. Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to eating a lot of good food, but also probably eating way too much. So.
What part of California are you from?
I grew up in Torrance, California, so a bit south of Los Angeles area.
All right, I'm in Huntington Beach. So
oh, okay. Wonderful. Yeah, so whoever wants to go.
Okay. Quita Wong, Assistant Director for Residence Life Inclusion at the University of Wisconsin at Madison, and finals start on Wednesday, so it's crunch time for the students. Something I'm looking forward to over break is also going home. I'm originally from Texas, so just spending some time with family and friends. It's going to be great since we only get to do it twice a year. So, popcorn, Mindy.
Hey folks, so I'm Mindy. I am a second-year grad school student at Miami University of Ohio with Virginia, and I work on the academic side of the house with diversity in the College of Education, Health, and Society. And for the holidays, I'm excited to go to New York City, which I live 45 minutes out of, and Virginia, and two of my other friends are coming to visit me, and so I get to do all sorts of touristy things with them and eat lots of food, so I'm really excited. Yeah. So, I was going to say, so Derek, I don't know if you wanted to jump right in, and we'll just kickstart and see if other people join us, but otherwise the floor is all yours.
Sure. Yeah. So, yeah, thank you so much for inviting me to participate. And I'm sorry I haven't been able to join any of the others. Yeah, my schedule often keeps me in meetings all day long, so that's wonderful. But I definitely enjoy being able to kind of participate. And yeah, I got assigned Chapter 10, which talked specifically about Native Hawaiian and non-Native Hawaiian students, specifically in the University of Hawaii system. So although a very specific subset of the API population, I think certainly an important aspect, and certainly I can see things mirrored in experiences as students at my institution and other institutions that I've worked at. So I did throw up a couple questions on the Google Doc, just kind of maybe to start our discussion. But yeah, I think for me, yeah, maybe kind of starting off is, I guess, kind of asking, do you kind of see these experiences happening on your college campuses, whether it be of Native Hawaiian students or maybe underrepresented API students on your, campus population, and, what does that look like, and how does this particular chapter resonate for any folks who are here?
So I just started at Wisconsin in August, and I honestly have not met a single student who identifies as Native Hawaiian. I've been to different multicultural spaces, and it seems to be very Black, Latino, and South Asian. So I'm not sure if there are any spaces for the students, if there's any registered student organizations, but it may be perhaps because of our location. We are in the heart of the Midwest in Wisconsin, and I'm not sure if a lot of students know about the different opportunities here. And yeah, so that's my experience so far.
Yeah, I would agree a lot with what you said, Cleo. Like, I think, at least in Virginia, you definitely interact with the population a little bit more than I do. But I don't think I've met anyone who identifies that way either. And certainly, I think, and I'm sure there might be students that way, but I do also wonder, like, to what extent they know resources or feel comfortable reaching out to us, because the understanding of the population is very like almost like one-dimensional point of view, where they really like, they might know Chinese, Korean, Japanese, and that's about it. And so like, would they feel comfortable voicing those concerns? But yeah, so along the same lines.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I guess to kind of talk about my experiences here at Northwestern. Yeah, I haven't met certainly a large population of Native Hawaiian students here at our institution. When I worked at an institution in the West Coast at Western Washington University in Washington State, there was a significant Hawaiian population there. We recruited pretty heavily in Hawaii, and so we had a pretty large student population. Many of those students looked for groups specifically on our campus to kind of support their cultural kind of experiences and values, and I think they often congregated together in the halls and outside of the classroom. And so it was certainly something that I saw as a need on our campus to provide services. We also had faculty on our campus who were from Hawaii, and so they often helped mentor and advise a lot of the student groups that were on our campus there. But that's unlike my experiences here at Northwestern. I think the large API population here often comes from South Asia. We have a large number of Indian students who still identify as international, but maybe went to boarding schools here in the States, and so have a bit of more of a American culture kind of in their upbringing. But yeah, I don't think that we have a strong, I think, support or identifying factor for Native Hawaiian students, and I definitely think that is lacking here on our campus.
I definitely agree in terms of like there is not a large population, and then I think that like at Miami's campus there's not a large Asian American like population as well. So to find it's kind of like it sounds bad, but to find any type of like community is tough, and so to really develop at least like a baseline community would be helpful for students. I mean, that's what I see, at least in the work that I do. I know that it is not ideal, but it's like, at what point do you like hit that threshold and like, oh, we have X amount of students who they can form their own student group, when you know the students that you're working with for like a larger umbrella group is, you know, you're still struggling in that. I don't know, balancing sometimes.
Right. Yeah. Thanks everyone for sharing. So I know we kind of started talking about the next question, but I guess in terms of talking about the themes from the particular chapter of, you know, certainly incorporating aspects of financial support, incorporating aspects of students' cultures and values into support services, talking about really, I think, kind of the holistic support for student populations. Do you see that being mirrored for underrepresented API student populations in your campus, that mirrors something that maybe this particular chapter talked about in terms of supporting Native Hawaiian students?
when I saw that this part of the chapter talked about different factors that determine success, and so the lack of many of these factors, it really resonated with the Hmong student population here at UW-Madison. It's a larger group of students on this campus who identify as API. And so I saw like parental encouragement, but also this lack of academic preparation and lack of financial assistance. When, interacting with a lot of Hmong students, we talk about how, they may, like many other students, are the first in the family to go to college, but they're perhaps number 4 of 7 siblings, and they're the first ones to go to college. So just to see that the different factors that led them to UW-Madison, but also to obtain a degree or an education, I think that we have to understand that a lot of our students from the minority part of our larger Pan-Asian group of support, because they're not as adequately provided services like other groups are, or that cultural parental encouragement may not be there, because there are some different ethnicities where they're not encouraged all the time to go pursue a degree in higher education, but to stay close to the family and make sure that they're providing for their family in other ways versus obtaining an education. And I think that when we're thinking about how we can support our students because of these factors, we have to educate ourselves about these different cultural contexts, and that'll help us support them. So.
I definitely agree in terms of understanding students' cultural context, where they're coming from, and all that. I think it's important to kind of, I know this is very critical of me, but to challenge the idea of success. What does that mean to them? Because not everyone goes to college. Maybe number one, wants to go to college or wants to attain a degree. Maybe they're there for their specific purpose. Maybe they're there just to, obtain a skill set so that they can go and do something else that they're more passionate about. So trying to understand what is success defined by certain standards, what standards are we looking at. Yeah.
I think for me, I also think a lot about so on a very practical standpoint, how do I broach these conversations? Because in the book, it highlights how these might be student experiences, and then it's also dangerous to potentially universalize it. And I think a part of the reason why I'm I don't really know how to broach those subjects or get to the point where I talk about that is because I have so little experience working with this particular population of APIA students. And so for me, I think a lot about how do I help a student get to a point where they are comfortable, but it's not I'm making them my learning moment. So what does that look like in terms of creating that trust and trying to ask those types of questions without asking it in a way that's kind of so do you fit, or do you do you identify with these needs or not? And so I think this chapter and reading about it statistically and logically and intellectually, I'm aware that there's a discrepancy, and then in practice I think I've been thinking a lot about how do you then apply this knowledge in a way that is supportive of students and allows them to feel they are approaching the subject rather than me taking this abstract body of knowledge and then trying to apply it. I don't know if that really made sense, but
Yeah, thanks, Mindy. Yeah, I mean, that certainly makes sense. And so, yeah, I think, certainly my experiences at Northwestern being, I guess, a mid-sized private institution, I think often the baseline conversation around financial need is often something we also don't talk about here. I think most students assume students are well off, that they're able to attend the institution without much need for financial aid. We have students who are able to pay upfront $65,000 for tuition at the beginning of the year. But I think there is a very silent population on our campus, especially even when you break it down in terms of API students, who really do need assistance, and I think certainly don't want to apply kind of in general what are these kind of challenges or experiences of students on our campus. But I think I've had a hard time being able to, I think, break into how do I support students on our campus in this regard, because we don't talk about SES on our campus often, which is certainly a challenge, and certainly an unfortunate aspect of working at specifically Northwestern private institution. But in the past year or so, we've created student services on our campus that provide hopefully access and kind of a central point for students who may need that assistance to then kind of get them plugged into the different aspects of campus, help them to navigate the institution if they are a first-gen student who don't maybe have family members who can encourage or support their success in what they want to achieve while they're here, because they haven't maybe gone through going through college, earning a degree. And so, yeah, that has been something that has been different from my experiences working at other institutions. So a new experience for me working at a private institution. Okay. So the other question that I had kind of posed is talking about our roles as student affairs higher ed professionals, and how do we see our roles kind of fitting in, and kind of the support, and maybe in some cases initiating the conversation on our campuses. I know my experience within our division of student affairs, I am one of 20 across a division of over 500 employees that I've identified as API, just based on divisional meetings that I've attended. So we are very much lacking in API staff and representation on our campus. Specifically in residence life, I am the only one who identifies as API. So that's been a challenge to kind of maybe then be seen as the person to kind of be a voice for or advocating for API students within our student population. So I guess, how do you see your roles fitting into support for students, and making sure that we are talking about this particular need for our student populations?
I think for me in particular, because I also identify as the only one in the department, I have to be conscious about how I'm also supporting other marginalized student populations. But my role, that it's important for me to be connected throughout campus, not just in housing or residence life, but also with the Multicultural Student Center, and be very visible for our students, and making sure that I'm introducing myself to our students who identify as API, and let them know that I'm in housing, even though if you live off campus, or you do live on campus with us, make sure you reach out to me, because if you want to potentially apply for a student position that we have opening up in the future, or if you're interested in together more programs within the residence halls to educate the majority of students in different contexts of awareness about the API culture, let me know. Let's collaborate on different things. Let's potentially create programs for an API History Month in April and May. So I think that making sure that I'm very intentional in introducing myself and connecting with the students, even though I may not have direct connections with them because of my position, but putting myself out there. I learned that from a mentor who was an associate VP, but he was still connected and made sure that he was visible within the community. And he connected students to different internship opportunities and to different cultural organizations and made sure that they didn't feel alone. So making sure that I'm doing the same thing as well.
So I think I really echo a lot of Cleta's points, and I'm also thinking a lot about the demographics at Miami University of Ohio. So for me, I can't help but think about kind of like my intersectional identities and how in a lot of ways I kind of embody, like, at least within staff, kind of like multiple like marginalized identities that aren't very well represented on my Amy's campus. So one, of course, being APIA, two, identifying within the queer community and specifically within the genderqueer community. And so like when I think about all of those different things interacting, I think presence is always something that I'm very aware of. I think just in the way that I show up and being proud in the way I show up, I find has an impact on students that I don't think I really realized until I came to Miami, because my undergrad institution was at University of Maryland College Park, so it's a very different type of staff, faculty, and student demographic. And so coming here and being in kind of what is like a very different demographic, I think presence in itself has been really important. So when I think about supporting students, I think a lot about how do I show up in spaces, how do I advocate for even myself in those spaces, or how do I advocate for certain student needs in those spaces. In turn, I find that students actually are more likely to come to me because I think part of it's my shy nature and part of it is my youth in the field. Is I can be hesitant sometimes in approaching students and trying to kickstart those conversations. But then also, like you said, Cleta, is like the intentionality of it. So like recognizing that, yes, because Miami is a particular type of population, like I do need to be intentional in not just supporting APIA students, but also students across the board. But then also because of some of my unique intersections, also recognizing that a lot of these students may also be experiencing unique intersections, whether they're similar or different to mine. And so, like, how do I also help create spaces in a place that sometimes very much silos identity in a way that is supportive of a student in a more holistic manner?
I like that. I was going to say mine is a little different in terms of in addition to showing up and being present and reaching out. I was going to say continue learning. I don't know. I feel like there are a lot of things I don't know, and like just reading this chapter, I feel like I didn't know very much about the Hawaiian populations and understanding the different challenges that they're faced with. The next step will be, after learning, will be taking action. And so trying to challenge myself to get out of my comfort zone and to actually take action is tough for me, especially when I feel like I'm not as critical. I feel like I'm not as vocal. And so just trying to challenge myself to continue being critical and vocal in supporting students, whatever that means for them. So, like, for instance, reading this chapter, like, keeping it in the back of my mind, like, certain populations experience, have higher likeliness of experiencing certain things. to look out for those signs, I guess. And so that kind of bring it up if possible, to see if that's something a student is experiencing. So just trying to, again, extend my knowledge, and then challenging myself to be a good advocate and ally.
Great. Yeah, thank you for sharing, everyone. Yeah, I think certainly in terms of my role here, I think it's been easy for me to kind of get wrapped up into the daily work of my position and not really kind of challenge myself to really push myself out of my comfort zone too, and kind of understanding certain student experiences on our campus and understanding how I show up in those spaces too. When I walk into a room and people see me as maybe the only API individual, how do I make sure that I can continue to be a resource or advocate for students and be a voice for students when they need that individual to kind of be a representative at times. I think I also feel that pressure, I think, as a staff member to kind of take that on. But I do appreciate kind of Cleta's point there of making sure that you're intentional about being represented not only just within your maybe functional area of the institution, but how are you kind of reaching out and partnering and being available across the board at all aspects of the institution. So certainly good things to think about. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I don't know if there's any other questions that folks had or points that folks maybe wanted to discuss as part of this chapter, but those were all the questions that I had, so.
Awesome. I guess we'll move on to chapter 11 then. So chapter 11 specifically talks about Asian American Greek letter organizations in higher ed. And so before we start, I just wanted to briefly ask, does anybody identify as a part of an Asian American Greek letter organization? No? Okay. Well, let me give you some context. Originally, when Virginia sent out different chapters and to see if anyone was interested in particular ones, I was very interested in this one because I identify as an Asian American Greek member, and I'm actually one of 7 founding mothers for my organization. And a lot of this chapter really resonated with my own personal experience, being at a predominantly white institution, private, mid-sized, small to mid-sized, and just reading about the historical context behind Asian American Greek letter organizations, and seeing what different founders had to go through, in the early 1900s and in the past 30 years, definitely resonated with me. So we'll go ahead and dive into this chapter. So it talked about how there was institutional and personal racism that prevented many of the students from joining historically white organizations in the late 19th century. When I read this part, I thought to myself, I wonder if this is still happening today. And in my mind, I'm thinking, yes, it definitely does still happen. Do people know of any recent examples? I have at least one, but it's not specifically with Asian American students, but most recently at Southern Methodist University in Dallas, Texas, there was some post where an individual said that I think this individual was a member of a national Pan-Hellenic organization, so historically white sorority, and she said something to the lines of, I don't understand why they, people don't understand we don't want any Black students in our organization. So they typed it out, and there was a screenshot of these messages, and it was made public. And so just to see that, this is still happening on who knows how many campuses where organizations were historically white, and leaving out different marginalized students who may be interested in joining this organization for different reasons, the philanthropic reasons, the service, the leadership, scholarship. So just thinking about, this does still happen today, even though it originally occurred in the late 19th century. The reason why these organizations were founded, because they were not included into different memberships. But, centuries later, it still happens.
I mean, I think so. It's not necessarily like an actual event. So this past semester, I did my practicum work with our Greek office, and Miami University in like the larger Greek world has quite a reputation in terms of historical significance and in terms of prestige, which I learned very quickly. But one of the components of my position was I did kind of like a very, very, very like preliminary assessment on our demographic breakdown coming into recruitment. So basically I looked at recruitment numbers from last year. And so like I think it's interesting because it's not like Miami has had any major incident, like there hasn't been necessarily this very overt like we aren't looking for or anything like that. And we see still though, just in recruitment demographics, that students of color across the board are really struggling in terms of there are less of them to begin with who even try to go through formal recruitment, and then actually the retention rates between those who do go into recruitment isn't tremendously high. And so I think when you were saying that, Cleta, I was like, oh no, it's definitely still an issue because like demographically by breakdown, and it's certainly not unique only to the APIA community, but we see it overall, is like there are still discrepancies. And of course, like putting into context Miami's demographic, of course, like it's never going to be a predominantly, people of color within our Greek life, because that's just not what the university demographic is. And we see like if we did an institutional breakdown versus a Greek life breakdown, there's still a pretty large discrepancy. So I think a lot about what are some of those less overt messages that students are receiving, and like I think particularly with Greek life, because there's sometimes like this image thing, like what is it about that might keep students who do not necessarily visually, let's say, identify with some of those students from joining the organizations, even without something as blatant as like we don't want you attending or joining.
Yeah, I think here at Northwestern, for many of the student organizations, students have to apply and interview to be a part of that organization. So even as simple as like a Chinese Student Association, students have to apply, be interviewed, and then they get accepted or denied. I think the transparency in which students go through that recruitment and interview process and reasons why they maybe get turned away is hardly ever, I think, forthright and transparent and discussed. So I think oftentimes students filled in that void with reasons of why maybe they were excluded. I do think some of it could be certainly undertones of racism, of students saying, you don't really look like somebody who should be part of our organization, so we don't want you to be part of our organization. We've had a particular student org on our campus, it's a business fraternity, who their student, I think, recruitment numbers in terms of students of color have been very, very low over the past 3 years. And so there was just a story in our student newspaper talking about, is this organization maybe kind of have undertones of kind of exclusion in terms of students of color to kind of be part of that organization. And so, yeah, I think it is something that is occurring on our campus. I don't know how vocal we are about discussing the things that maybe are happening on our campus. I don't know too much about our Greek life population here on our campus. I do know that we have organizations that live here on our campus. But I don't know much about kind of what the recruitment process looks like here, and if they've had issues with recruitment and things of that nature. So, yeah.
This is a side note referring back to the example. I found the screenshot. It said, quote, "This is the South, parentheses, hence Southern Methodist University, close parentheses, and a majority of girls are legacies with strong ties to the chapters they join or will join, and tend to come from old money. The reality is that Black PNMNs, so prospective new members, are often unqualified for recruitment, parentheses, low GPA, bad grades, not involved on campus, know nothing about the houses, in parentheses, and are heavily unprepared, parentheses, no letters of recommendations or letters of support, and generally come from a completely different background, parentheses, impoverished lower class, close parentheses. So going through recruitment is 10 times tougher as a Black woman, and you will have to work harder than other white, Asian, Hispanic, or foreign women." So this was actually a screenshot obtained by a Twitter user at mypwi, and it was a conversation about Black women in recruitment at Southern Methodist University. But you see how the other was also included in this conversation, so the other still have to work hard too, which is interesting. So another question is, when thinking about the different factors that the founders experienced, founders of Asian American Greek letter organizations, what were these factors that made them create their own organizations in the early 1900s and even within the last 30 years?
So I actually wanted to go back to that screenshot that you just read, the quote you just read. It's interesting to me. It kind of reminds me of like cultural wealth, capital, and like maybe first generation college students having to navigate this experience for the very first time, not having someone to kind of who's been through it to let them know about it. It's interesting to me, like the parallels between that, and then yeah.
I'm thinking about my own experience, just in general, being at a predominantly white institution. So yes, I went to a predominantly white institution in the South, but the majority of institutions are predominantly white unless you're in California. Or so I think that identifying as first generation is definitely a factor in that, as Virginia said, no one had the experience. There is no opportunity to be a legacy of an organization or having just the general knowledge, the depth of knowledge of what these organizations are, why they were founded or why they exist at these universities. And so it wasn't until my roommate, actually, it was my freshman year, first semester, my roommate, Grace, she identified as ethnically as Chinese but grew up in Hungary, and she was in a fashion merchandising course. And she said that in this course, a lot of the women talked about bids and these organizations and these Greek letters, and she was very confused, probably because of her own experience identifying as an international student, not white, and not understanding the different contexts of different organizations on campus. And but that also translated to my own experience in that I didn't know what she was talking about either. Apparently there was a CD-ROM or a CD that was sent out by Fraternity and Sorority Life showcasing all of these organizations, but organizations in National Panhellenic, or Panhellenic, and then also in the Interfraternity Council, so IFC. But none of the multicultural Greek lettered organizations were part of this recruitment CD. And so I don't remember.
Hello, Clea, are you there?
Am I back? Okay. Okay. I was like, wait a minute.
I think we lost you at, there were no multicultural Greek organizations on the CD-ROM.
Right. So there are no multicultural organizations, right? Many students typically joined an Asian American Association, or Asian Pacific American Coalition, if that even existed, right? And so they didn't understand what this Greek life, fraternity and sorority life was, and they'd never heard these words before. Perhaps because they also saw their peers, their white peers in these organizations, but also, clustered with their white counterparts in these organizations. There was this perceived notion of I don't belong because I don't look like them, and so. But in addition, many of these organizations, like the chapter talked about, they're historically, purposefully, intentionally exclusive, right, to different types, even with religious backgrounds. And so many of these founders had to create their own organizations because they were consistently excluded. Also, they were just always socially perceived as the other, which still happens today for many of our students, right? They naturally tend to join Asian American Greek letter organizations because they understand that they may not fit in within a historically white organization.
I think that for me opens up an interesting I I think a lot about perception in this case, because I think a lot about the original intent of why Greek letter organizations were founded, and it says the first one, for example, was founded for a space so they could have literary debate, so kind of a space in which, because they felt excluded in thought, they created a space so they could be included in thought. And then that also brings me to if I think about a lot of Greek letter organizations, I don't know if it's right to say their fundamental values. So I'm trying to learn kind of the catchphrase and the core values to multiple IFC and Panhellenic chapters, and it's intriguing to me because a lot of that on paper number should be quite universal, and then but then it becomes complicated because perception of who belongs and who doesn't, and that whole legacy factor, which I think is like the epitome of social capital, which, you know, like it or not, like whether you're APIA or just a person of color, like you can never quite catch up on, so to speak, because higher education and a lot of the basic institutions of the United States weren't made for us, so to speak. And so, like, in some ways, we're always going to be behind in social capital. And so, like, I think when I think about why some of these, like, specific, like, identity-based Greek letter organizations emerged, I think it's just interesting because they emerged for a lot of the same reasons that, like, the original fraternities and sororities emerged. And yet the very origin of that has become exclusionary, and so they've created, it's almost like a second beginning. But that's kind of me just nerding out about the irony, but then the parallels of, like, the reason why Greek communities were created in the first place was to be these separate spaces. And so, like, in some ways, the founding individuals of these, like, APIA specific sororities and fraternities did the same thing that the founders of, like, these, like, nationally recognized Pan-Hellenic and IFC fraternities and sororities did. So I just think it's an interesting parallel, but then I also think, like, to what degree then does perception play a huge role in this versus, like, history or, yeah. Sorry, a lot of thoughts there.
Yeah, I know here at Northwestern, we do certainly have multicultural Greek letter organizations, and I think a number of our students of color do seek out those organizations to find community on our campus as a means to connect with other students who they perceive maybe identify or have similar experiences or can kind of empathize in terms of their experiences here on our campus. But I think when we talk about Greek life, they are often excluded in kind of the larger, what does recruitment look like on our campus? How are we supporting students within recruitment? And so, yeah, I think I lack a lot of knowledge in terms of, I know, like, we have a delayed recruitment system here at Northwestern that happens in the winter quarter, but I don't believe that our multicultural Greek letter organizations are on the same recruitment cycle. Based on some students that I know that are part of those organizations. But I often think, too, they often don't talk much about those organizations. Maybe, I think, because of the perception on our campus that, well, that's not really Greek life, or, you know, why are you seeking out that organization, not joining the larger, more well-known social fraternity or sororities on our campus? And so, yeah, I think that you bring up some good points, Mindy, too, of, you know, what is the kind of perception on the campus of, you know, why do those organizations exist, and what sort of, I think, reputation do they come with when students join those organizations. But yeah, I think at Northwestern we have about 40% of our student population are Greek, whether that be Pan-Hellenic through IFC and multicultural Greek organizations. So yeah, it's a large subset of our student population that seek out that opportunity to find community on our campus and within our community here. So yeah, I definitely need to learn more about our organizations here on campus and how they came about on our campus and for what purpose, I think, did they originate, and how are they continuing to be supported on our campus.
So on Miami's campus, I work with the Asian American Association. This is sorry. So I work with the Asian American Association on campus, and in the spring, in around February, they have a show, like a dance show, and they were trying to figure out a date in which it did not coincide with formal recruitment. And so with that, they decided to hold it a week after formal recruitment so that they can hopefully get more attendance. But their rehearsals, their like dress rehearsals, were going to be the week of formal recruitment, and I wanted them to be aware of that. And they really brushed it off. It was very interesting. Like Peter, you were saying earlier, and also in the chapter, they were talking about how a lot of students generally join, for instance, Asian American associations, and they kind of don't see the benefits of Greek life. It's interesting to me to kind of, like, how do you balance telling someone or saying, like, oh, you know, this is a good opportunity, like in research shows or whatever, that students will benefit from an experience like this. So how do you expand students to, you know, consider something like that? So they push it off in terms of saying, like, oh, there's not going to be a lot of people who will join, who are in AAA and who will want to join group life. So I found that interesting, how, again, the perception of what it means to be in Greek life, and I kind of felt like they didn't see the benefit in it. And just more questions, always more questions.
That kind of goes into our next question. You know, today students who are a part of these organizations or who choose not to become a part of these organizations, there's different, you know, things that we have to understand as far as their identity development with that. Some students choose to join some of these organizations because, depending on which chapter, which campus you're a part of, they may have these historical contexts of, oh, this is a great organization for partying, or, oh, they're different opportunities to educate the campus about just Asian Americans in general and our different ethnicities within our Pan-Asian population. But again, you know, some students, they don't see the benefit of the different leadership skills or the philanthropic opportunities or volunteer opportunities. But again, it depends on the chapter. So some chapters who, you know, if they're part of this larger organization and they meet their requirements, they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. But then there are other chapters who focus on other things, which may or may not include going out a lot and partying and developing a reputation for that, where students understand that this is what I'm going to gain out of this organization if I join it, particularly this chapter. And so how do we help them and support them in their experience and support students who do choose to join these organizations for a variety of reasons, but also support the students who don't choose these organizations for their reasons?
I mean, like, I think a lot about, so this past semester I've become very pro-Greek life, and then I also recognize, though, that for some folks, because of membership fees or just process or whatever, like, they really, maybe Greek life just isn't for them, you know, because that's not where they feel safe or supported. And so, like, I think about it kind of like in a twofold way. So, like, one, if a student does decide to move forward with, let's say, the recruitment process, whether that's intake or formal recruitment, making sure that they're set up with the appropriate resources, because it's a very confusing process, and there's, like, a lot of fine print that you should read before you embark on it. Like, I don't know if everybody knows, like, for example, there's, like, membership fees, and sometimes there are additional housing things, so, like, making sure they're understanding it. And so whether that's me or putting them in contact with the appropriate resources so they know they are supported through that process. And then, of course, making sure that they know options beyond IFC and Pan-Hellenic. And then on the other side, like, if a student is like, I'm just looking for space, but, like, I don't want Greek life, like, so what type of organizations are you looking for? So again, whether that's, you know, if I know those organizations, or if it's like, hey, you should really talk to either these students or look on this website. I think it really about, for me, is helping students make sure that they know there is a space for them and it looks different, but, you know, like, there is a way to find it, and so, like, supporting them through that process. I will also say we are almost at time. in that we have 1 minute left, and I'm trying to be respectful because I know this is a busy time of the year, even though I really love this question, and I would love to hear everybody respond. So really quick, does anybody have any final thoughts? Virginia, I know you want to get a picture in, so yes.
Can we have Derek speak so that you can get a big picture of my thing and then I can take a picture?
Okay. Is this speaking enough?
Cool. Thank you, everyone. Sorry, I wasn't paying attention to the time. Thanks, Mindy, for helping us there. But yeah, thank you, Derek, and thank you, Clea, for facilitating these 2 chapters. We hope to see you again next month, and have a good December, everyone.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
All right.